So what we're going to do here is we're going to rank or put them in a tier list of different categories. So it's going to be elite rivalries, and we've limited ourselves there. We can only put 3 games in the elite tier. Then it's going to be great rivalries. Then middle tier is, solid fun. The 4th tier is kind of the meh category. And then the 5th and bottom tier is, it's not actually a rivalry here. And so some of the criteria that we're going to be looking at as we go through this tier ranking is national impact. How does it affect the playoff and the national championship race? What does the pageantry look like? Because it's college football. You got to have some pageantry. Is this appointment viewing for the average fan that is not a fan of one of those 2 schools that's playing there? Entertainment factor, level of hate between the 2 fan bases, iconic moments that you can think back to easily. And then, of course, also the trophy that they're playing for, maybe the name of the rivalry itself. So, Tyler, what we'll do here for those watching on YouTube later on, we'll go ahead and actually share the tier list here so you guys can watch along, but we'll try to make it as easy to listen to as possible for those that are listening on the podcast. And what we'll do here is we'll just kind of go in a little bit of random order. So the first one up on the screen here is the Southwest Classic between Arkansas and Texas A&M. This game has been played 92 times. Arkansas leads the series 42-35. As of recently, this is a game that's been always played at Jerry World in Arlington there, but I don't know. This one doesn't give a whole lot of juice for me. Where would you put this one, Tyler?
I think I would kind of put this in the middle tier. It's good. It's not great, but it's also not meh at the same time. I think that this rivalry is obviously it's come back to life here in recent years, obviously, because there's been a lot of exciting moments. There's been a lot of exciting games down there in Jerry World between these 2 programs over the last 5 to 6 seasons, really, since, both teams have been part of the SEC again for quite some time. Sorry. But yeah, outside of that, it really doesn't bring anything else to the table really for me, just simply because, when you try to look at what makes, a rivalry truly special, and you try to divide it up into these different tiers, I thought that you did a tremendous job, Adam, in kind of prefacing, because, if you're not a fan of a particular school, there's got to be certain criteria that's met with each of these different rivalry games to be able to elevate it to that status where you're glued in, you're watching, you make it a priority to be, invested in watching this game annually. So for that reason, I mean, I really can't even tell you that I've sat down and watched maybe more than a quarter, maybe 2 of these. So for that reason, I'll probably put the A&M Arkansas game in the kind of that good category.
Next up, the holy war between BYU and Utah, played over 100 times. BYU leads 59-32. So a healthy lead for the Utes there, but this one ranks really high for me on the hate factor. I think it looks visually great because they often wear color on color matchups. And I think it's great to have an in-state rivalry there. And they've played this game despite being in different conferences for the last 10 to 15 years or so. Mm-hmm. They found a way to do that. So I think this one for me is kind of in that great category. I think this is a really good one. It might be the Big 12's best rivalry at this point.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can't get there with you fully on that. I think that it's good. I'm not quite ready to put it in that great category yet. I think that if you're a resident of the state of Utah, this means a little bit more. Or if you're a member of the of the religious community that's a part of that, then I think that this definitely means a little bit more. But we had an opportunity, Adam, to go out to BYU last year. Provo was a fun town. It was not like what we're going to see going into the SEC this year by any stretch of the imagination. But Provo was good. It was a fun atmosphere, and I think that rivalry game between those 2 programs, that's definitely one that I would consider, right up there with Texas A&M and Arkansas. So it's good for me. It's definitely something that I'll pay attention to each year, but it's not something that I'm going to ride home about and say, yes, I've got to be invested in this. I've got to watch this football game no matter what weekend or what time of day it's being played.
I'll give you that one. So we'll keep them in the middle tier there, the solid fun. Next up, this one is where we might offend some people, I think. We've got the Deep South's oldest rivalry, Georgia versus Auburn. It's been played 128 times. Georgia leads 64-56. Auburn only 5-15 in their last 20. For me, I'm almost putting this in the solid fun in that middle category again, because I don't know that I feel like it hasn't been appointment viewing for me as of late.
I would throw it in the meh category just simply because, and again, we're 30 years old here, so we don't have the full, the full understanding of the rich tradition of this rivalry going back over 100 years time. But when you look at the last 20 years, it has been a completely one-sided affair, and that is Georgia over the Auburn Tigers. So again, when you look at over the last 5 years, really since Cam Newton left Auburn, really how has this game impacted the conference championship or the national title race? It really hasn't, in a sense. So again, maybe it's going to mean a little bit more. Maybe I'll get a little bit more interested in it now that we're a part of this conference. So I'll be paying attention to that game a little bit more each and every year. But it's just kind of a meh right now. It's two helmet schools. It's two programs that have a lot of tradition, a lot of history, especially here in the last 15 to 20 years. But again, it's just not something I'm like, so throw it in the meh category for me.
That is interesting because I thought I was being generous, trying to bump it up a little bit there, putting it in the middle solid fun category. But I agree with you. I think it's in the meh category, and maybe we'll get some comments from people not liking that one. Next up, the Border War. This one really not being played. It hasn't been played since 2011. Kansas versus Missouri. The trophy. I don't think that they would do this if they were to play the game today, of course, but the Indian War Drum, I think that's probably the best part about the rivalry, because otherwise these teams are really insignificant on the grand scheme of things. For me, I think that's a meh. It's at least a rivalry because the teams are close. They share that Kansas City metro area. A lot of their alumni do, but for me, it's kind of a meh category.
If you're an alumni or if you're a fan of either of these two programs, yeah, this game means a little bit more to you. But if you're just any other college football fan of another program, this 100% falls into the meh category. These are two middle of the road, maybe even some sorts, maybe even call them a bottom feeder type program. If we're talking college football here with Missouri and Kansas, this game does not do anything for me from an intrigue standpoint. So again, throw it in the meh category for me, and that's probably being a little bit generous.
Next up, the Palmetto Bowl between Clemson and South Carolina. It's been played 120 times. Clemson with a healthy 30-game lead in the win column there. I don't know this one, I guess there's been some okay games, but overall, like South Carolina, not a great program throughout their history for the most part. Clemson, good, recently been a lot better, but overall, not much national implications. Usually stuck at that early kickoff on that last Saturday of the year. Just doesn't feel like it's that prestigious.
South Carolina was good when Steve Spurrier was there, and wasn't Lou Holtz a coach at South Carolina for a brief amount of time? You flip it over to the other side, you go to Clemson. They've been good since Dabo got to town. So when you kind of look at the overall historic perspective of this rivalry, it's just really kind of, I'll say it's good just simply because it's an SEC team versus, kind of a powerhouse in the ACC right now. But I mean, just in terms of, recent success, especially, I mean, Clemson's had South Carolina's number, for each of the last, 20 or so years. So again, it's good. I'll watch it. I have watched this game a little bit more over the last couple of years, just simply because of the Spencer Rattler angle and the Shane Beamer now being down there in Gamecock Nation. But again, this is good, not great.
Next up, we got Kentucky versus Louisville for the Governor's Cup. This game actually surprisingly only been played 35 times. Majority of this since 1994 when Louisville joined Conference USA, and Kentucky has a 5-game lead there. But this game, I guess, is okay because it's played a little bit earlier in the year, but otherwise it feels so insignificant compared to other rivalries. I think I'd put this in the meh category.
I could absolutely care less about this one. If we're talking college basketball, sign me up for it all day. I'll definitely watch it. But I mean, Kentucky versus Louisville in football, it just really doesn't move the needle for me. There's too many other good games on throughout the day for me to fully devote one television screen to this. So throw it away.
The Apple Cup is up next. This one being continued despite playing in different conferences. Again, two in-state rivals figuring it out, finding a way. You love to see it because the Apple Cup is, I think, sometimes fun. You get some good weather in certain cases. Even though the Huskies have a large advantage in that series overall, I think this is still fun. I'd put it in that middle tier there, that solid fun. So we still haven't reached either of the top two tiers yet, but I think I would go middle tier here.
I would go middle tier here as well. I've got some good memories with this game because this was kind of my first, Pac-12 after dark experience where, whether this game was being played in Seattle, being played up there in Pullman, you could always count on this being like a 52-45 or 38-42 type of ball game. It was always intriguing. There was always a lot of interest, a lot of points that were put up, and there were also some good iconic moments that came from this as well. Now, since we're not living out there on the West Coast, we don't have a real good understanding of the level of hatred between these two programs and their fan bases. But just from a pure entertainment standpoint, I put this one a little bit higher compared to some of the other ones that we've talked about so far through this conversation. So yeah, I'll throw it right there in that middle category as well. I think you got it in the right spot.
Next up, Oregon versus Washington. This is one that I think we will rank, at least I'll put it in that middle tier. I'll see what your opinion is, Tyler, but I think it's the middle tier game right now. Ask me a decade from now, I think this probably moves up a tier at least. And the only thing really holding it back is get a good name for it. There's no name for this rivalry.
Yes.
There's no trophy that they're playing for. Every game in the Big Ten has a trophy at this point. So I would expect this one to develop something because these are two really good programs. We've seen some great games. We saw 2 games last year that were fantastic between these two schools. The colors look great on TV. It just needs a name, really, in my opinion.
Phenomenal uniform matchup. And we got to experience that 2 times a year ago. I think that this definitely belongs in the good tier right now. I think that it was on the verge of maybe elevating to that great tier, obviously, before Kalen DeBoer, chose to leave Washington to go to Alabama. We'll see if, I think Jed Fish took the job up there at Washington. We'll see if he can continue that level of success up there with the Huskies. But yeah, I think that this definitely has all the makings to, it's never going to get on the same tier as like Alabama, Auburn, or, some of the other ones that we're going to talk about here in just a little bit. But this has been a really fun rivalry game, especially over the last few seasons, because the Pac-12 has kind of come down to these two teams more often than not. And so, whether you're getting one matchup a year or you're getting the conference matchup, a rematch that we saw a year ago, I think that this has been a really good rivalry. So throw it in that middle tier for me as well.
Next up, the Egg Bowl. They play for the Golden Egg. Ole Miss versus Mississippi State. They've been playing for 120 years, and Ole Miss holds almost a 20-game advantage over the Bulldogs. This game typically played on Thanksgiving night, but it's being moved off of that day this year. I kind of hate to see that because I feel like that means the rivalry will get lost a little bit in the shuffle of everything else that happens Black Friday and beyond that weekend. But I don't know, maybe this is a contender, our first contender for that great tier, the next one up from that middle one.
I think it qualifies for the great tier for reasons that have nothing to do with the game being played. Nothing to do between the lines.
Is that good? Is that good or does that hold it back though?
I definitely think that, you categorize one of these as appointment viewing, and as a college football fan, even if it's not your team, that's a part of this rivalry. Are you still going to make sure that you're in front of the TV watching this? I can say that yes, whether it's because it was on Thanksgiving Day and nothing was on at the same time. But yeah, I've made it a point to where this has been a highly entertaining game that I've enjoyed watching over the last few years. Do I think that it's going to continue to grow maybe to that next level? I'm not sure. We'll see what Jeff Lebby does. Lane Kiffin's got it rolling right now down there in Oxford. You've got some iconic moments like the Ole Miss player, peeing on the field after scoring the touchdown. The level
not
of
literally
hatred,
peeing on the
not
field.
literally.
I think our audience knows what you mean by
everybody
that.
knows it. If not, look it up. But yeah, the level of hatred is definitely there between these two programs. The entertainment factor, the trophy, it's got a good name. So yeah, I think that this qualifies. This is the first one to throw up there in that great category.
Next up, the big game, longtime ACC rivals Cal and Stanford playing for the Axe. Now, this one does have one of the most iconic moments in all of college football history. Way back, I think it was in the 70s, where they had all the laterals on the kickoff, and the player runs down the field and kind of dunks the football on the tuba player there for I guess it was Cal dunked it on the Stanford player there. So it has an iconic moment. This game really doesn't mean a whole lot though. So I don't know how to weigh that. I feel like that's kind of in the meh category for me.
It's definitely in the meh category. I mean, kind of pretty much everything out there in the Pac-12 right now, especially since USC, Washington, Oregon, and UCLA are no longer part of this conference. It's kind of cruel to say, but I could really care less. If that game's on, chances are I'm not going to be watching it. So it really just simply because it doesn't do anything for me, throw it in the meh category for me.
Next up, Backyard Brawl. This one's kind of back on the docket. I don't think it's official that it's going to be regular every year, but they're trying to get it more regular. West Virginia versus Pitt. They've played over 100 times. They're not that far apart. Yes, they're in different states, but a lot of West Virginia alumni living in that Pittsburgh market. And Pitt owns the series by about 21 games here, but this one definitely has the hate. It feels like there's some good games. You kind of have that iconic game that everyone thinks back to where Dave Wannstedt and the Pittsburgh Panthers upset West Virginia to keep them out of the national championship game way back in 2007. So this one, I guess you could consider it there for that great category for sure.
I can't put it up there quite yet. I think that this is definitely, it falls in the good tier for me, just simply because when we listed the categories off on what, constitutes somebody being warranted of having a good or a great or an elite type of rivalry, there's just simply not enough boxes checked off on this. Yes, there's some good iconic moments. I'm not sure that the level of hatred is there for this one compared to some of the ones that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Maybe so, maybe so. But I mean, when you look at the national impact that this game has, it does not provide any
It doesn't bring
any
that anymore,
it,
especially since they're not
ex-
conference rivals anymore.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And chances are, I mean, outside of that one game that you alluded to where they kept West Virginia out of the national championship, the winner of this game, it really has no bearing on the the overall result of what could potentially happen for them down the season. They're not in the same conference. Neither one of them are ever going to compete for a national championship going forward. So I'll throw it in the good category. I would almost probably consider it meh, but I'll throw it in the good category.
Okay, that would be the first time where I'd overrule you on that one. I'd keep it out of the Met for sure. This is at least solid fun. Next up, our first Oklahoma game, Bedlam, OU versus Oklahoma State. This is a game that Oklahoma has dominated. It's the most lopsided in-state rivalry in the entire country. OU owns Oklahoma State 91-20. They play for the Bedlam Bell, or at least they used to. Now they kind of play for that outline of the Oklahoma. So the trophy, like 2 thumbs down for the trophy. It sucks. And I guess this game really isn't being played. It's not on the calendar. Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State refuses to play the game. They act as if, they can't make, a non-conference opponent in Oklahoma. So it's kind of tough there. But this game, very entertaining. I think from a national perspective, a lot of people, I think, do say, hey, that's appointment viewing. It's got pageantry. It's got iconic moments, even though a lot of those are in OU's favor. I think this is a strong contender for that great category, despite the imbalance in the overall record.
You took the words right out of my mouth. 91-20 in favor of Oklahoma. In terms of the play on the field and the overall performance of both of these programs, this is not a rivalry whatsoever. It's just simply not. But when you look at the other things surrounding the game being played itself, does it have an impact on things nationally? Yes. Chances are this game, it did have an impact on who was going to be one of the representatives in the Big 12 championship. Ultimately, if Oklahoma goes on to win this game, it did have playoff implications for them as well. It's got the pageantry. It's got an epic setting. The game day atmosphere, whether it's in Norman, whether it's in Stillwater, it's a fantastic game day experience to be a part of. Appointment viewing, I guess you could say that as a college football fan, even if you're not, even if you don't have any, vested interest in either one of these teams, just simply because the way that this game has been played over the last 15 to 20 years,
it's like always a good game.
It's always a good game. The amount of points that are scored, the running joke is it's Bedlam, bet the over because of it. So I do. I think that we've got some iconic moments. The level of hatred, it's definitely ramped up there a little bit more so. I think that Oklahoma State fans probably hate OU a little bit more than Oklahoma fans do, just simply because, again, this is not a rivalry. It's an ass kicking. So yeah, I'll throw it in the great category though. This is a fun one to be a part of, and obviously one that we have a little bit more deeper ties to.
I might offend some people with this next one, known as the third Saturday in October, Bama versus Tennessee. I think the name kind of sucks, honestly. And Bama owns this series against Tennessee with a 20-game lead, especially during Nick Saban's era. It hasn't really been competitive other than the 2022 game where Tennessee finally broke out and won that game on the field goal on the final play of the game.
Phenomenal game.
To me, this feels a lot like the Auburn-Georgia rivalry, where it's like, it's not really appointment viewing. I'm kind of like it's a secondary rivalry for Alabama. For Tennessee, I guess it's their biggest rival, but I don't know. It doesn't carry a whole lot. Maybe it'll get more even in the coming years with Nick Saban leaving, but for right now, I don't think I can put it super high.
I think it carries a ton of weight down south, but it doesn't extend across the country. Maybe I'm off base a little bit. Obviously, now that we're going to be part of the SEC, maybe we might, get a little bit more of a deeper understanding of this rivalry game. But, especially over the last, 20 to 25 years, really since Phil Fulmer left Knoxville, this has kind of been a one-sided rivalry, and especially here over the last 10 years with Nick Saban being at the helm in Tuscaloosa, this has always been kind of more so of name your score on how well Alabama's going to do, regardless of if the game's home or away. It's entertaining. I like the cigar aspect after the game to the victors because of it. But I think that I'll throw this in the good category.
I'll I'll grant you that. I feel like it's a little harsh to put it on the same level as Kentucky, Louisville, or Kansas, Missouri, or
Oh,
Stanford, Cal.
1000%. And I'll even take it one step further, and maybe we raise the bar here. I think that Alabama, Tennessee is much closer to Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, or Ole Miss, Mississippi State than it is to like a West Virginia Pitt. So I don't know.
See, man, the backyard brawl is where we're gonna disagree on that one. I'd much rather watch that over Bama, Tennessee. I'd much rather go for Oregon, Washington over that one. So, but I think good is the middle tier. There is the one that makes the most sense.
I can live with that.
Next up, the duel in the desert. Pretty even between Arizona and Arizona State on the overall record. I like the trophy, the Territorial Cup. That's where everything ends for me. This game means nothing on the national scale. It's usually played at 10:30 at night. Nobody cares. Not appointment viewing whatsoever. I feel like this is totally a meh.
Meh. Move on.
Yeah. Next up, Oklahoma versus Texas, played in the Cotton Bowl amidst the Texas State Fair. It's a game that we look forward to every year. There's nothing else like it. We only have 3 spots that we can use for that elite tier, but this is a no-brainer for me. This goes elite tier.
1000%. We have our first occupant of that elite tier here. Adam, it's the best rivalry in college football. The atmosphere is very unique in a lot of different aspects, and it's unlike any other game in college football where you've got 300,000 people all within a 1-mile radius on that one Saturday for the State Fair of Texas. The rides, the wax cup beers, the fried food, the buses driving through the crowd to get to the stadium, half the bowl crimson, half the crowd burnt orange. The momentum swings in this game is unlike any other game in college football. It's always had Big 12 title implications, national championship implications, Heisman Trophy implications as well. It's must-see TV. It's a hell of a lot of fun come October competing for the Golden Hat. It checks every single box that you laid out at the beginning of this. So, yes, this is an elite rivalry. It's the number 1 rivalry in college football.
I agree. Next up, we've got the Keystone Classic, Penn State versus Pitt. It's been played 100 times, although it did go on hiatus from about 2000 to 2016. Penn State leads by 10 games. So they're starting to play this one again. I don't know. It hasn't hit my radar necessarily quite yet. I'm sure that fans in that state really care a lot about it, and they think of each other as rivals, but nationally, this one hasn't hit the radar just yet.
It's a home state regional type of game where the rivalry means a little bit of something across the board nationally in college football. It just doesn't simply do it for me. So I'm going to throw this one in the meh category. I know that we're starting to fill these things up a little bit, but when you try to forecast, when you try to lay this thing out in terms of, in the grand picture of trying to forecast what are the best overall rivalries in college football from top to bottom, this one just simply doesn't do it for me. Doesn't have any impact on the national championship. Doesn't have any impact on non-fans of these programs, making it a priority to go in and watch these games. So, yeah, I'll throw it in the meh category.
Next up, Northwestern versus Illinois, known as the Land of Lincoln game. The trophy is the Land of Lincoln. I love that. Illinois has a 2-game lead in the overall series. This feels a lot like the duel in the desert, though, where it's like, who even cares? Like, who cares other than, I don't even know if people in Illinois care, really. But otherwise, like, a cool name, cool trophy, but like, meh. Otherwise, I almost would put it as not a rivalry if it wasn't for the fact that they were in the same state.
I don't even care if they are in the same state. I would say that this is not a rivalry.
All right, we have our first entry on the bottom tier there. Not a rivalry. Next up, the Magnolia Bowl, LSU versus Ole Miss. They play for the Magnolia Trophy. LSU has about a 13-game lead in the series. I don't know. I don't think of this one almost ever, Tyler. I think I'd almost have to go meh.
I would have to go meh for it as well. I mean, especially like as we sit here right now in 2024, this is going to be a phenomenal matchup this year. And we've had some really good games between these two programs over the last couple of seasons, especially since Lane Kiffin, has been calling the shots down there in Oxford. But even though I think that this year and maybe, even the years going forward, this is going to have implications for the college football playoff, for the SEC West, just because of what it's done so far up to this point. It's kind of in that meh category for me right now where, again, I'll watch it if it's on, but I'm not going to go out of my way to say, hey, yes, that's when that game is being played. Circle that on the calendar. Cancel your plans. That's what we're doing. So I'll throw it in the good. We'll throw it in the good. I can't put these two teams, these two helmets in the meh category.
Next up, I've got one that I'm going to say is not a rivalry right off the bat. That's the battle line game between Arkansas and Missouri. This game has only been played 15 times. You can see that the graphic that we have on YouTube there is sponsored by an insurance company. This is totally manufactured. The SEC tried to get it going. They were the crossover opponents, the East-West Division opponents there for these two teams. It sucks. Nobody cares.
The people watching is more entertaining than the actual football game being played, with those two fan bases getting together that Saturday during the year. Yeah, it's meh. I could really care less.
A fun one here next. Farmageddon, Iowa State versus Kansas State. They've played over 100 times. Iowa State has a 3-game lead in the series. I actually looked this up. K-State doesn't have a winning record versus any Big 8 team ever. Obviously, they dug themselves a big hole before Bill Snyder showed up. But this one's kind of fun. It's got a name. It's kind of a fan organic type of name. And it's interesting. I don't know if I would put it. I don't think I can put it in meh, but I'm not sure the fan bases care that much about them. And I'm not sure that anyone nationally really cares about this.
I don't think anybody nationally cares about this. I will say that the fan bases that are part of the Big 12 conference over the last few years have taken interest in this when it's being played, even if you're not a fan of the Wildcats or the Cyclones. So I would throw it in that good tier, honestly, just because this one's always had, it's always gone towards deciding the outcome of who's going to be playing in the Big 12 championship game. Obviously, these are two programs that have been a part of that game, in recent years. So yeah, throw it in the good category for me. That's always a good one to watch.
And those are two great fan bases that kind of just embrace it. And even though they might have losing records going into it, like they're going to make sure that's a fun game at the end of the year. So I respect that a lot. Next up, an interesting one, the cocktail party, Florida versus Georgia. They play for I'm going to mispronounce this, the Okefenokee Or. It's been played over 100 times. Georgia with an 11-game lead here. A lot of people say this is just like OU Texas. Obviously, that's one of the biggest lies that you could possibly make, in my opinion, because they split the crowd differently. And I actually learned this today. They split the crowd on the end zone. So there's not an OU end of the field and a Texas end of the field like
it's like a hot dog
there. It's like a hot dog, but also they haven't been doing that the entire time. This is a game that they used to basically split it section by section. So it looked like a beach ball effect back in the 80s. They used to play on campuses. There's been talk of moving this to campus. In fact, today they announced that the Jacksonville Jaguars Stadium will now have a roof on it in 2028. So I don't know. The atmosphere for that just doesn't do it for me in some sense. And nationally, there aren't many iconic moments I can think of other than Georgia showing up and ripping off the red jerseys to reveal the black jerseys way back when Mark Richt was there, I think in 2007 when they did that. So there's not really like iconic moments from this, but it is at a neutral site, I guess.
I mean, the moment where Georgia kind of stormed the field after they scored that touchdown.
Got the penalty. I think that was 07.
I think that was 07. So this game's always interesting for me. This falls in the great category for me, just because you look at the history, you look at the tradition, the success of these two programs, especially here of recent. I'm not talking about the Billy Napier era in Florida, but you look at some of the classics that have been a part of this, when Steve Spurrier was in Gainesville, when Urban Meyer was in Gainesville, and, Mark Riggs, Kirby Smart. There's been some knockout dragouts in this series over the last 20 plus years. And I know that, kind of looking at the overall, score of who wins and loses, it kind of goes in spurts. It kind of feels like we'll go back and have to take a look at it, but it kind of feels like this series kind of similar to OU Texas a little bit, where one team will win, 2 or 3 years in a row, but then Georgia might win 5 in a row, and then it swings back over to Florida's favor. But I think that this checks off enough boxes for this to be considered a great rivalry. It's must-see TV. It's got a good atmosphere. The fact that it's not played on campus, I think, kind of gave it a little bit of a nod in this discussion. But yeah, you got to put Florida Georgia in the great column. It's a fantastic rivalry.
We're not going to rank every rivalry in the Big Ten because literally every game has a trophy. So if you're waiting around to see what Michigan, Indiana's trophy game is, we're not going to rank that one. But we'll get to some of them here. Minnesota versus Wisconsin. They play for Paul Bunyan's Axe. That's pretty cool. It's been played 133 times. Wisconsin has a 1-game lead. That's cool. There's no national significance. There's almost like people probably don't even know this is a rivalry game, in my opinion. So I think I have to put this down in the meh category.
It's definitely in the mech category. Fantastic trophy, and for what they play for, it's a great name. But like you alluded to, with Wisconsin, they've definitely had their moments of success here in the Big Ten. Over the last decade or so, Minnesota has kind of been a factor for maybe 1 or 2 years since PJ Fleck has been in Minnesota. But again, this just it doesn't move the needle for me whatsoever. I could kind of care less. It's kind of a middle of the road Big Ten game, which is not a lot of fun to watch. It's not very easy on the eyes. So I'm going to throw it in the meh category as well.
I'm almost in a not a rivalry mode for that one. Even.
It has the same intrigue as Northwestern Illinois does. If I'm being completely honest, it's got the same level of intrigue for me. So if you want to throw it down there in the meh category, I won't fault you for that. Or even
I'll leave it up there for having the Paul Bunyan axe.
Okay.
That's at least worth something, even though there's several axe trophies on here. Next up, the Sunflower Showdown, K-State versus Kansas. They play for the Governor's Cup. It's been played 121 times. Kansas has only won 4 times since 1993, but they do lead the overall series. This one is, I guess, meh. Like there's nothing worth watching here, really.
No, and I really don't have anything more to say about that. We've kind of watched this game a little bit more over the last, 15 to 20 years, just simply because of their Big 12 opponents, their common opponents that Oklahoma shared on their schedule each year. But again, in terms of, good quality football being played when I turn these two teams on to watch them go head to head against one another, it's just simply not there for me. Definitely doesn't have any impact on, the Big 12 or nationally. So for that reason, if you make me do it, I'll throw it in the meh category. But that's probably about as high as I would take it.
Next up, Oklahoma versus Nebraska. I know we have a lot of people that watch our show, listen to our podcast that grew up during the Barry Switzer era, peak OU Nebraska. In my opinion, this game not being played right now, I'm putting this in not a rivalry. The fans don't hate each other. There's no games. There's no appointment viewing. There's no national implications, even if they were playing. It's a bygone era at this point. Like if they were to start playing regularly, maybe it would be more interesting, but there's no hate. It's not a rivalry right now.
It was a great rivalry game. I think that, especially back during the 70s and maybe the mid 80s when, Tom Osborne and Barry Switzer were there, you could probably make the claim that this had an opportunity to be in that elite category just because of where those two programs were at that point in time. But again, even during the early to mid 2000s, this just wasn't really a rivalry game where both of these teams were, on equal footing going into this game each year. We all know that what happened, 2 years ago when Oklahoma went up to Lincoln, Nebraska. It was a hell of a game to attend. And I hope that we can go back there someday. But yeah, it's not a rivalry at this point right now. The game's not going to be played anytime soon, maybe not again in our lifetime. So for that reason,
I think it's on the calendar for like 2030 or something like that. So I think there is a return trip.
Okay.
We'll see if it sticks.
When both teams are good, and these are two phenomenal programs historically, when they're good, it's a phenomenal rivalry. But right now, it just doesn't do it for me right now.
Tyler, did you know that Clemson versus NC State is known as the Textile Bowl?
I had absolutely no idea. Tell me more.
That's why I think the argument for this game is not a rivalry, bottom tier. Clemson holds a 30-game lead in the series. No one really knows that Clemson and NC State are rivals. It's kind of an old ACC thing that really just doesn't matter.
Yeah, you probably only know that just because you used to live in North Carolina. So that's
probably true.
That's probably about it. So
that's probably true. Let's go to the game then. Michigan versus Ohio State. This one has the hate. I think it's got some of the pageantry. I guess it's okay that they play in the home stadiums. I can't try to fit everything into the mold of OU Texas. I mean, that's kind of unique. You can't try to make everyone do that. It hasn't had as much of the back and forth. It's had more of like runs as of late, really. But this is an elite game, so I think it's an elite rivalry.
It's 1,000% elite. When you try to look at this, and we can even talk recency bias here over the last 5 to 6 years. The national impact of this game. This has essentially been a college football playoff quarterfinal. Not only does this decide who's going to go on to Indianapolis to win the Big 12 or to win the Big Ten championship, but this game has essentially been a college football playoff eliminator over the last few years. It's got all the pageantry in the world, whether it's played in Columbus, whether it's played in Ann Arbor. It's must-see TV And even as a college football fan, if you're not a Buckeye, if you're not a Wolverine, you watch this game every single year. It's got all the iconic moments. The hatred between these two is second to none. And there's definitely been some entertaining games over the last, 100 plus years. So yeah, it's definitely in that elite category. Throw it up there next to OU Texas.
Next up, Oregon versus Oregon State. It used to be known as the Civil War. I think true college football fans still call it the Civil War, which I think is a great name. They play for the Platypus Trophy. This game, I believe, also will be continued despite playing in different conferences. Another in-state rival figuring out how to do it. For me, I think there's some fun games. It's not necessarily appointment viewing. You get some cool colors, unique color combinations there, played in some unique weather situations. So I feel like this is almost the same as the Apple Cup in similarity there. I know they're geographically very similar, but for me, I think this is solid fun.
I definitely think so. I think that good is the perfect category for this to fall into. When you look at these two programs, I have no argument with that whatsoever.
Next up, North Carolina versus North Carolina State. Tyler, this game, I don't think there's any national, focus on this or spotlight or anything like that. This game at times has been played in late or early November, late October, which actually syncs up with the North Carolina State Fair. And this is an area I grew up in, so I'm actually familiar with it. The Carter Finley Stadium where NC State plays is basically across the street from the State Fair, and it's usually kind of the parking lot for the State Fair itself. So there is some carryover possibility, but they haven't been playing the game during the State Fair lately. It's been moved to the last game of the year in late November. So I don't know. This game is just kind of meh at best.
Does this go back and forth between both campuses, or is this always played? Okay. I don't know. You can speak on this more than me. I'm not going to sit here and try to lay claim to the fact that I can talk Wolfpack or Tar Heel football. So yeah, this is really kind of a meh for me. It has no bearing on what happens in the ACC. Definitely doesn't have anything to do with the national championship race. If you wanted to get real technical, with Drake May being at North Carolina over the last couple of seasons, there have been some good games between these two opponents, but historically, in what deems this thing being a good, great, elite, or meh rivalry, it falls into the meh category 100%.
There's been some good games. They just don't mean anything because at that point it's 7-5 versus 7-5.
And that's the problem. And again, I'm not sitting here saying that games like Iowa State, Kansas State, or Kansas, Missouri aren't good football games, because it definitely does mean something to both of those states and both of those programs. But at the end of the day, if there's really nothing on the line for either of these two programs, it just simply doesn't do anything for me to make it a point to where I have to watch this game every single year. So
that's one where I'd almost be like, hey, why don't you move that to last Saturday in September, first ACC conference game, because you could go into that game undefeated, have a rivalry game that's kind of unique that no one else is really playing that week of the year. So yeah, there's a free one for you, North Carolina and NC State. Next up, USC versus UCLA. This one needs a name. There's no name for the rivalry. They do play for the Victory Bell. USC leads the series by 16 games, but I don't know. It looks great on TV. You got the pageantry and the Rose Bowl and the Coliseum. I don't know. This game hasn't meant a whole lot in my lifetime, though.
No, it really hasn't. We thought that this game was going to kind of come back to life, with Chip Kelly at UCLA, Lincoln Riley at USC, but it really never materialized. On paper or on the TV, it looks fantastic. The Rose Bowl out in Pasadena, that setting, you've got the USC colors, the UCLA blue. It's a hell of a lot of fun to watch. Unfortunately, there's never more than about 20 to 30,000 people in the stands for this game in recent memory. And I don't think that, truly too many people outside of the state of California, really outside of people that go to these two universities, truly care about. So we had some good moments, especially when Pete Carroll was at USC. We had some good teams at UCLA back during the early 2000s. But again, I would put this in the good category, which you already have, Adam. But this just doesn't simply do anything for me to where it could possibly make the arguments or reach the great tier.
The pageantry is very strong with this one. I think that alone is worth putting in that middle, good kind of solid fun territory. Next up, the Sunshine Showdown, Florida versus Florida State. They play for the Florida Cup. Kind of a newer rivalry in the grand scheme of things. Only been played 67 times because Florida State is newer to major college football. Florida leads this series by 9 games. This one's kind of fun. As of the last 10, 15 years, it feels like they've never synced up both good at the same time for the most part. I don't know. You can make an argument for, I think, good or kind of great. It kind of straddles that line, in my opinion.
How many do we give for the great and the elite tiers?
We get 3 for elite. We can put as many as we want in the great category.
I would throw this in the great category. Sunshine State, it goes back and forth from Gainesville to Tallahassee. And you make a really good point, Adam. It's been very rare that both of these teams on the same season have been able to link up to where it is a top 10 matchup or a top 5 matchup. You just simply haven't gotten that like you have in OU Texas or in Ohio State Michigan. So that's what keeps it out of the – that's one of the things that keeps it out of the elite category for me. But if this game is being played, most of the time, College game day is going to be there. Most of the time, this is going to have an impact, on recruiting. The level of hatred between these two fan bases is right up there with some of these others that we discussed. So I would throw it in that great tier as well. I will watch this game if it's on TV.
Yeah, I agree. Next up, one that we're definitely making appointment viewing because it's coming back for the first time in a long time. The Lone Star Showdown. Texas
got a little
A&M
extra juice
Texas.
on it after today.
Extra juice with Schlossnagel going from A&M to Texas to coach the Longhorns there in baseball.
Before we touch on the football rivalry, you're a huge baseball guy. I'm a huge baseball guy. Oklahoma fans, they've been through this before. It's obviously, it might be a little bit apples and oranges because Lincoln Riley leaving OU to go to USC. Obviously, college football is a much bigger, much bigger deal than college baseball is. But I think you could even make the claim that what Schloss did is worse. Because I think it is hands down. You choose to go to your arch rival to a program that is far less, has far worse facilities. It definitely has the backing of the booster support, but with what A&M has built in College Station right now with their baseball program and with the financial commitment that they've agreed to make, especially with the facility upgrades that are going to start next year, what a chicken shit move this is. I'm sorry.
One game away from winning the College World Series, and you go back to work. I know he has the relationship with Chris Del Conte there, but A&M was about to build, one of the nicest facilities. They already have great facilities there, but one of the nicest facilities in College Station. So it's not like Lincoln Riley. I think it's kind of different, but I love that it's being compared to Lincoln Riley just because it's like vindication of like, yeah, Oklahoma fans were right. We were right the whole time. People are finally woken up to it now. We're not getting apologies really, but at least we're getting the comparisons and the jokes that we need to feel that vindication. So,
Adam, the crazy thing is that it's being reported that he had already agreed to eventually do this before A&M made it to the championship series to possibly win a national title. So
I think I kind of think that's true because I don't think it comes together that fast. And the comments he made last night in his press conference, kind of a jerk. Like, he's perfect for Texas. So
yeah,
this one got more juice. This rivalry got more juice, more fuel added to the fire. I think for me, like, it's got a good name. I'd love to see a trophy, maybe a spur or cowboy boot or something like that to be passed between the two teams. That's kind of iconic. This one is great for sure. And maybe we do come back and revisit it and say, maybe it has a chance to be in the elite category when we get to the end of this exercise.
It's elite. I don't think there's any question that this is an elite rivalry. Not because you have two programs like OU and Texas or Ohio State and Michigan that have the success on the field in terms of national championships, conference championships. Texas A&M simply doesn't have that. But when you look at what this does, especially regionally, when you talk recruiting, you talk dollars and cents, you talk about these two fan bases, the pageantry, it has an epic setting. The game day atmosphere in College Station this year is going to be phenomenal. The animosity, the hatred, there's going to be fights outside the stadium. There might be fights during the game inside the stadium. This is going to be must-see TV. The minute that it was announced that Texas and Oklahoma were going to the SEC, people have circled and been anticipating the fact that Texas and Texas A&M were going to be lining up on the same field together for the first time in quite some time. It's got the iconic moments. It damn sure has got the level of hatred. If it didn't already have it today, it damn sure does after what just happened about 5 or 6 hours ago. So again, entertainment factor, this is elite. Make no mistake about it. If I had the ability to make it down there this year for it, I would go watch that game. I would buy a ticket to go to Kyle Field and watch these two teams still go at it. I hope A&M skull drugs them to oblivion this year.
Wow. Love that. Next up, we've got the Golden Boot, LSU versus Arkansas. I remember this being a fun game when Darren McFadden was at Arkansas because they would often upset LSU there on Black Friday. But the SEC really deprioritized this game when Missouri joined the conference, and they had that battle line game between Missouri and Arkansas that we already said is not a rivalry. And this one took a major back seat. It'll be interesting to see if this game gets more prioritization with Texas A&M joining the conference. Now you have Texas and Texas A&M and that rivalry we just talked about. So maybe this one comes back into play more in a more prominent position. But for me, I think this is kind of in that meh category as it stands today.
Adam, you're spot on with this one. It's definitely in the meh category. The fact that you've got Texas A&M that's a part of this conference now, and OU and Texas coming into it this season, this just puts this game lower on the pecking order in terms of the other games. The other matchups that are going to be afforded to us to watch by having the Longhorns, by having the Sooners as a part of this conference as well. So it's in the meh category for me. Which is kind of crazy to think because I can remember growing up watching those Darren McFadden teams run all over LSU on Black Friday. It was a lot of fun to watch.
Next up, Michigan versus Michigan State. This one needs a name. There's no name for this one. They play for the Paul Bunyan Trophy. And now that I'm seeing that, I'm kind of thinking that I need to move Minnesota versus Wisconsin into not a rivalry because I rank them so highly based off of that. I rank them highly based off the axe, but Stanford and Cal also play for an axe. So I think Michigan State bumped that rivalry down for me. But this has been typically a fun game. Michigan State not very good the last couple of years, but overall, I think this is a pretty fun rivalry. I think I'd put in that middle tier of good at least.
You can speak to this a little bit more so than me. I mean, obviously, this has been a one-sided rivalry for quite some time with the Wolverines kind of handing it to the Spartans annually. But you've got some family ties to the Michigan State fandom. So I would defer to your judgment on this one. But again, it doesn't really do anything for me. But I still think that because of the state that it's in, because of these two programs, like because of the level of hatred that I think is there between these two schools, I throw it in that good category.
Next up, the Butt Bowl.
We're
Baylor
doing
University versus Texas Tech. The Butt Bowl. Had to include this one. They do play a lot. They're old Southwest Conference rivals. They've played 82 times. Baylor has a one-game lead here. To me, I guess it's kind of interesting for those schools, but they're small fan bases. I think this is meh territory.
Yeah, it's 100% mad. The fact that I'm pretty sure the reason that you put it on this list for us to talk about was because it is the Butt Bowl.
It's like Farmageddon. It's kind of a fan organic type of name.
Absolutely. I feel like you either love it or you just simply do not care about it whatsoever. And
it's kind of a meme.
I do not care about this. If there's anything that I take away from this game is I'm hoping that there's a big highlight play that, goes viral on social media. That's the only interest that I have. That's the only part of me that will watch anything that has to do with this game. These two programs are irrelevant. They've been irrelevant for their entire history. I hate to kind of take this kind of crap on them a little bit here, but it is what it is. It's the Butt Bowl for a reason. Meh.
I'm moving that down to not a rivalry. I don't think it is one.
No argument.
Next up, the Rivalry, Baylor versus TCU. You've got the religious aspect, even though those two schools, they're not Christian in any way. Let's be honest here. They had some good games between, back in 2013 era between Gary Patterson and Art Briles. Hasn't been as spicy as of late, but I like the name, the Rivalry. They've played 119 times. Is that enough to move them out of the not a rivalry category up into meh territory?
I think that it is. I don't think it's not a rivalry. It definitely is. Okay. I would throw it in the meh category because I think that this is a game where if you're a fan or if you're a student or an alum of both of these schools, these are the only people that this game matters to. I like TCU. I almost went to school at TCU. It's a fun campus. Fort Worth is phenomenal.
You feel like private school material.
Baylor, on the other hand, Texas is my number one most hated school. I can't stand Baylor. I've been to Columbus in an Oklahoma shirt. I've been to Atlanta for the Peach Bowl against LSU in an Oklahoma shirt. Where else have I been? I've been to Texas A&M. I've been a lot of different. I've been to Stillwater. The time that I went to Baylor for the OU game was the worst that I have ever been treated as a fan, as an opposing team fan. I think Oklahoma won by 30 or 40 that game. But again, we can say that for another episode. But yeah, I can't stand Baylor. Throw this in the meh category for me.
It's not the Deep South's oldest rivalry. It's just the South's oldest rivalry. It's UNC versus Virginia. these fan bases don't care, even though UNC has a 7-game lead here. This doesn't even register on national impact games. I'm putting this in not a rivalry. I think that one's pretty simple.
It's great if we're talking college basketball. It's not a rivalry in the football landscape.
Here's an interesting one because we have filled out the elite tier. We said we would only put 3 games in that elite territory, and now we get to Army versus Navy. This one has the pageantry. I think for a lot of fans, it's appointment viewing, but there's absolutely no national impact when it comes to college football in the playoffs. Obviously, national impact, Army veterans versus Navy veterans there. But
Adam hates the military.
It's a running joke on the show here. I hate the military, but actually, this one almost is not appointment viewing for me, but I think for most of America, it is. It's just kind of like I don't know, like it's fun.
It's great.
Yeah,
it's standalone. Typically, it always has its own weekend. Everybody talks about the Army Navy game. College game day is always there. This game definitely is number one in terms of pageantry. When you talk about the environment, everybody that's there, the flyovers, the national anthem, the sense of pride that comes really not just for the guys that are playing, not for the guys or for the men and women that are in attendance, but just it feels a little different watching this game on Saturday, even though you're not watching Alabama, LSU. You're not watching Ohio State, Michigan. If it's a different sport, but I think that it's great in its own sense. And you're not going to have the national impact from a football standpoint. I'm not going to take the same approach as you, Adam. You don't have the iconic moments. You definitely don't have the level of hatred. The entertainment is a little bit different here, but it's still a hell of a lot of fun to watch. So I'm going to throw it in that great category as well. We love the troops.
Next up, the Floyd of Rosedale game, Iowa versus Minnesota. Zero fun to watch unless you bet the under like I did last year.
And the trophy is cool. Or did you win?
I might have lost that one. That was the weird one where the punt return got called back because of the fair catch. I'm mad at Minnesota for the Paul Bunyan axe thing with Wisconsin. I'm almost in not a rivalry territory. I know these states border each other technically, but it's just not an interesting game to me. Maybe you could put it in meh.
Yeah, it's meh.
Okay,
it's meh.
Next up,
how many of these are? God, we're doing them all.
We've got about 10 left. We can kind of rapid fire a few of these. Georgia versus Georgia Tech, good old-fashioned hate. I think this is kind of meh territory for me.
It's meh, ass whooping.
Notre Dame versus Southern Cal.
Great.
Yeah, I think this is appointment viewing. Tons of pageantry.
2 blue bloods. Phenomenal uniform matchup. It has had a little bit of national impact, especially recently. This one's great.
How about Oklahoma versus Missouri, a rivalry that is returning kind of? It's been a rivalry on Twitter.
Is it though?
It was for the Peace Pipe Trophy. I don't think that trophy is going to come back if they do that again. But the SEC is going to force this. And we'll see. If Missouri continues to be, an 8+ win program, I think that's a rivalry. As of right now, I think it's just on Twitter. So I'd say not a rivalry at the moment.
What's the series record, Adam, if you've got it there in front of you?
I do have it. Oklahoma leads 67-24, and Missouri has only won 4 games since 1970. I think that's not a rivalry until more happens on the field.
It's not a rivalry until Missouri wins a couple of matchups consistently, and they actually do something more than winning 9 or 10 ball games once every decade or so. It's a rivalry to Missouri fans. It's a rivalry now. Simply because of what's happened off the field over the last 12 to 18 months with recruiting, with tampering. No, make no mistake about it. It's going to be a hornet's nest when Oklahoma goes up there, just because I think that there is if you want to call it a rivalry, but there's a newly invested interest, and there's been some energy that's been rejuvenated into the Missouri football program. Oklahoma is always going to bring it. That's never gone away. But I still don't think that this is a rivalry.
How about Rumble and the Rockies? Played 70 times between Utah and Colorado. The Pac-12 tried to make that a rivalry game. I don't think it really ever was. I don't think anyone cared enough to watch it, make an appointment viewing, or had any hate there. We'll see if the Big 12 tries to do the same, but for me, that's not a rivalry.
It's not a rivalry. The only reason that, maybe national people are going to watch is because Deion Sanders is at Colorado now. Speaking of which, did you see where Keyshawn Johnson said that he's picking Colorado to win the Big 12?
I feel like Keyshawn Johnson doesn't know anything about college football, so it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, this is not a rivalry. Could care less.
Let's stay in the state there. Colorado versus Colorado State, the Rocky Mountain Showdown. It's
phenomenal game last year.
Power Conference versus lower conference. To me, it's meh at best. I guess they're in the same state.
Yeah, phenomenal game last year. Was it triple overtime? Colorado found a way to win it at the end in Boulder. But yeah, it's just meh. It means a lot. I can sit here and say this, being up here in Denver now, it does mean a little bit more to the people that live in this state. Obviously, especially with Deion Sanders now, I kind of feel like everybody's more on the gold and black, rooting for the Buffs. But there's definitely some CSU people up here. So this is meh, but it does mean a lot to the people of the state.
Last couple here, the Cy-Hawk Trophy, Iowa versus Iowa State. This is one that, like we talked about earlier, I think they benefit a lot from playing week 2, 3, or 4 in the season because it gets more of a spotlight. It's usually an interesting game. Iowa State, to me, this is in the solid fun, the good category. I think it's very similar to like your Civil War or your Apple Cup, where you've got in-state rivals, and one team is traditionally a little bit better than the other, but Iowa State's still good enough to bite Iowa in the heel a little bit here and there.
1,000%. Completely agree with you. It's in the good category.
The Iron Skillet game, TCU versus SMU, Old Southwest Conference rivals. To me, it's kind of meh at this point. Great name, though.
Yeah, great name. A lot of money between those two fan bases when they get together. But yeah, I'll throw it in the meh category. It doesn't really do anything for me, but you can usually count on a lot of points being scored. So it does provide a little bit of entertainment value.
Here's an interesting one. Miami versus Florida State. People that are probably about 10 years older than us would say, this is great. This is a great category. Hasn't been a great game in a while, in my opinion. I think this one probably, maybe at best, is in that middle tier territory of solid fun, good.
It's good. Unfortunately for, people of our generation, we were never able to experience it back when both of these teams were consistently number 1 or number 2, or both both in the top 5 when they matched up each and every season. I kind of feel like you can't go a college football season without seeing the montage of the 4 to 5 different missed field goals that resulted in the other team winning. But we just haven't been privy enough to having both of these programs be consistently good on the national landscape to really make this, kind of a great or an elite rivalry. So I'm going to throw it in the good category when talking about the Seminoles and the Hurricanes.
No need to talk about Purdue versus Indiana. That's meh at best. Nobody cares. So that leaves us with our final one here, the Iron Bowl, Bama versus Auburn. They've played 88 times, not as much as you would think. There was about a 40-year hiatus between 1907 and 1947 where there was a disagreement. They used to play at Legion Field in Birmingham because Alabama refused to go play at Auburn. Tennessee actually did the same thing because Auburn Stadium was too small, so they met at Legion Field. Actually, both schools played a lot of home games there in Birmingham. It wasn't until the early 90s, really, that they started going back and forth, home and home. So we've already maxed out our elite category there with the 3 games. We said we would hold just to 3. We've got OU versus Texas, we've got Michigan versus Ohio State, and we've got Texas versus Texas A&M. So unless we want to knock one of those out, the highest this can go is that great tier.
I think that you're doing a disservice, and it's pretty disrespectful to not put this game in the elite category. It's the Iron Bowl. It's got everything that you want in college football, especially over the last 20 years.
Iconic moments.
Iconic moments, the level of hatred. Both of these programs have, won national championships over the last 10 years. You got to kick Texas A&M out if you're just going to limit this to 3. The Iron Bowl stands alone up there above Texas A&M. It's got to be in that elite category. But the Lone Star Showdown, I think that's what they call it. Maybe it'll change a little bit. Texas A&M, it's definitely kind of the first runner-up to that top tier of college football rivalry games.
I agree. And as that game gets played more regularly now, maybe it does challenge for a spot there. But yeah, I agree. I think the Iron Bowl, there's so many moments you can think back to off the top of your head for both teams that you can go, okay, iconic moments, pageantry, appointment viewing. It's been a great game. So I think definitely worthy of that elite tier there. So
I wonder if the spread has been announced on that game yet. You would have to think that it would be less than a field goal.
For the Iron Bowl?
No, for Texas A&M. I think that Texas is the better football team, but
it's at A&M, isn't it?
It's at A&M. And when A&M gets it going, unless it's App State, it's pretty hard to play there.
That's true.